the town of Yamhill.
So
Years off, it goes back to the bills.
there's an office
This is Russell Creek.
that's maintenance, and they kind
So they're
of
fine.
take care of the facilities here.
Okay.
So, because we actually don't
This
have
is-
offices here, we're across the street in another house, but she, the gal in there, she said she even wanted to, but she's gonna keep working on it. There is also stairs she could let you in through the door, because it's on the courthouse.
I was told Phil wanted that to give to the secretary?
Yeah.
Is that you?
Yep.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
She could provide it, no couch there, she'll set you with some kind of something, she could, you could, if you need to go.
Secretary?
Yeah.
Is that you?
Yep.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Is that you?
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Is that you?
Yeah.
So it's up to you, typically, did you bring two copies or just one? Two copies.
As part of his defense was?
I think that's
So what we will need is something left.
Yeah.
As a copy for the record. So, this would be the laptop that you can use. Unless if you want to. Actually, is this? Yeah, I know. That's not your laptop, that's yours, right? Okay, good. Good, I'm making sure. You did put your thumb drive in it? Yeah. Okay. So I think both of you are gonna use it, so we'll just have to bring hers up when she's done. Yeah, no worries. Thank you very much. No, I think it's not necessary that we do So we know that it's so there's no, we don't sort, even though I have this set of.
You're just sitting around eating bonbons.
I see we have one comment. Just so you know, the comments. That's something that has to. Okay, so, and then I have turned comments. So she says she has a waiver. We're gonna need to. They could potentially. Thanks. I tell them only she was bring us up. I always tell them.
Hello, Rick, how are you? Is this yours?
I keep doing it. Probably right. Mary, nice to meet you. Hi, how are you? Hi, Mary. Sarah, good to meet you.
Morning, Alan. I'm Yamhill. I know you are.
I'm sorry, sir. You're in my chair. Oh, that's right. God. How can we hear it?
It'll take a while to change this. Are you on Blair State? That's weird.
Yeah, I get a new position.
I like that. I like that.
I figured I didn't see that big old notebook.
Huh?
I didn't need to carry that big old notebook.
Well, I hate to wish I brought it, and I didn't bring it, so that you have something to talk about if you want to make.
I know that as many things as I've looked at, if there was something
You would have.
I would have spent a half an hour looking for it when I could just look to my right.
Thanks a lot.
So there.
All the comments.
Okay, these are the ones that just came in.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hello, Rick. How are you today?
I don't know, were you doing it in the studio?
No, we were doing it on location. On location at the senior center.
Okay, then somehow the mic setup has to be a little different because it was very hard. Okay, listen to.
Sure. Thanks. How are you? I knew you'd say that.
So I just want to go in here. Morning. You kind.
Morning. At this time, we'll open up the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal session for January 11th, 2018. At this time, we'd like to call for the flag salute. So, McKaylee, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, McKaylee. This is the time we have set aside for invocation prayer. Commissioner Primizic?
Yes, today I have encouraged one of our former colleagues, a gentleman that we had the pleasure of serving with here as a county commissioner, and was also a city councilor in the city of McMinnville, and has always been a very staunch supporter of all things good for Yamhill County, and is also a very strong Christian, and has agreed to come today and do our invocation. So, former Commissioner Ellen Springer, if you would, please.
Thank you. Good to see all of you. How's that mic doing? Well, good. Okay. Well, I got to be honest with you. There's something I miss about being a commissioner. I got to go through security now. Good night. I feel for you people. But anyhow, it's good to be with you here today. I got a few comments before we pray. But I'm only going to do 3 points in a closing. And after we take the offering, I'll pray for us, and I'm going to get you out of here before noon. So I'm going to cover all bases today. First of all, as a tax-paying resident of Yamhill County, I want to congratulate Chair Sterrett for being the chairman this year. It gives me great hope. I know her well. It gives me great hope for how the county will be directed by her as chairman this year, and I just wanted to tell you that I have great hope for our county in 2018. This is the first of the year basically, and my wife and I have kind of revisited how we're going to handle this year, and we've decided that we're going to be more positive this year than ever before. We're going to up our game. After all, we live in the greatest nation on the planet. What do you got to complain about? Even if things are tough, we work together and work towards making things better for all. I remember a friend of mine had international ministry, well known, and one of the things he taught me, he says, Alan, whatever you focus on, you make room for. So if you go around with your head down and complaining, all of a sudden you notice that you've got a lot of people around you with your head down, complaining, and you got a big session of complaints going on. But if you take a positive step and begin to build people up and look at the upside, it's hard for people to be bummed out in your presence. And as far as I'm concerned, it's all right if you want to be bummed out by yourself, but let's not all do that together. Let's get on the upside of things and be realistic of all the blessings that we actually have. Come on, right? You're sucking air today, that's good. You got a heartbeat, evidently. That's another positive. By the time you start evaluating those things, by the time you get to a few minutes of that, you're feeling pretty good, honestly. And I like feeling good. Secondly, I would like to address the staff. I've worked up and down the West Coast from San Diego to Portland. Construction all my life. I've been in some tough situations and in tough meetings that were over millions of dollars, difficult. And you want to bring out somebody's personality, start discussing hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars with them of their own money. You're going to get to the core of the person pretty quick. But I will say this, I have never seen a staff of this quality in all my career. We are extremely fortunate. From the administrators, office staff, even these guys. You know I'm getting lawyers. I don't have a really great place for lawyers in my heart, but I'm making room. I'm going to try to be more positive this year. But seriously, our department heads and everybody, we have got the top notch of the top notch, and I'm not sure how we did it. You couldn't have done this in the private sector, but it's been done. The planning director. Mike retired, it's enough. We have quality people. So I just want you to know that. We lost Chuck to retirement and then to death. He was a beloved member of the staff and a tremendous person also. Anyhow, that's it. So, I'd like to pray for us, and once again, I appreciate the opportunity. So, Father, I thank you for this place, this county we get to live in, with the leadership that we have. I appreciate it. I ask that you would bless them really good this year, and you would cause them to have unity and agreement. Because where there's unity, your word says there's commanded blessing. We're not just ordinary blessing, not just, gosh, let's be nice to one another, but I'm talking about from the throne of God, commanded blessing. So, Father, let commanded blessing rule and reign over this county this year, that we will experience a historical year of goodness, kindness, mercy in this county. And I thank you. And all God's people said,
Amen.
Amen. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Alan.
Great to
Good to see you.
Keep up the good
We had a lot of laughs.
Do what I can.
Thank you. All righty. At this time, we have public comment, which is a 30-minute time period set aside for any topic other than agenda items or quasi-judicial items in land use matters, a topic scheduled for the public hearing, or unless extended or restricted by the chair or the majority of the board. Does not look that we have, like we have anybody here wanting to make public comment, so we will move on to the consent agenda. And we have a consent agenda, but item B, there's a small revision, so our administrator will clarify that. Laura?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Commissioners, in addition to item 3, it's taking the same action as you discussed on Tuesday. We just needed to add clarifying language that you will also, in addition to be transferring the $60,000 in cash, you'll also be transferring the appropriation authority. So we added that language as well.
Very good. Madam Chair, with that amended language, I would move approval of the consent agenda as it's presented on our agenda.
All right, we have a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Let the record show Commissioner Olson, Commissioner Primizic, and Commissioner Sterrett voting in the affirmative. On to item C. Old business, we have none. Other business in item D, we have none. At this time, we'll begin the public hearing. So we'll open up the public hearing, and that is docket C-18-17 SDR/28-18, which is an appeal of the Planning Commission's approval of a conditional use site design review for a 12-acre solar utility facility. The appellant is Atticus Wines, LLC. So at this time, we will call for abstentions by members of the board. Any members of the board feeling the need to abstain? Okay.
No extension, but I do want to indicate that I attend all of the soil and water conservation meetings. Oh, I don't do that yet?
Not yet.
Okay, no, I have no extension.
Okay. Item 3, are there any objections to the jurisdiction of the board to hear the matter before it? Okay. Item 4. Now, Commissioner, any board member need to announce and state on the record the substance of ex parte contact?
Yes, I do attend the Soil and Water Conservation District meetings, and solar farms have come up during those meetings, and I just wanted to go on record as saying I've been involved in those discussions. No decisions made, and I'm certainly capable of listening to and performing my duty as a commissioner in this. So just wanted people to be aware of those conversations.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Madam Chair, I don't have any ex parte contact. To go on the record that yesterday with our planning staff and Lance, I did have an opportunity to go view the site.
Okay, the next step, any site visits. Commissioner Olson, Commissioner Primizic?
Yes, I did make a site visit yesterday. Wednesday, yes. And
Tuesday.
Tuesday morning, 9:30, I met Lance at the site and did review the property that is being discussed.
And I met Lance Tuesday at 11 o'clock, and we reviewed the site as well. Thank you, Commissioners. At this time, we'll ask counsel to read the statements required by state law at the opening of this quasi-judicial land use hearing. Counselor?
Yes, Madam Chair. Oregon law requires that persons who attend a land use hearing be advised of certain rights and duties before the hearing begins. First, with regard to the standards of approval, state law, ORS 1977635, requires that we list the applicable substantive criteria that must be met in order for the county to approve the application. The applicable standards will be listed by the county planner in a minute as part of the staff report. Testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward the standards for approval. Second, the raise it or waive it rule. Under Oregon law, any issue that might be raised in an appeal of the county's decision on this matter must be raised before the record of this hearing is closed. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision makers and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the board on that issue. Third, and this is directed to the applicant, under ORS 197796, failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval, again with sufficient specificity to allow the county to respond to the issue, precludes an action for damages in circuit court.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sadler. All right. At this time, we'll call for a staff report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The property is a single tax lot holding approximately 27.8 acres with direct access to the west side of Highway 47 between Yamhill and Gaston. The applicant intends to use approximately 12 acres for a commercial solar power generating facility. The property is relatively flat, level farm ground that has been used for grass seed and hay production. There is a barn and 3 grain silos located on the property. The parcel is located within the Yamhill Carlton viticulture area and is therefore considered high-value farmland per Oregon Revised Statute ORS 195. The surrounding properties are all zoned exclusive farm use, and the area is predominantly farmland with nearby agricultural uses including hazelnut orchards, grass seed, hay production, grain crops, as well as a vineyard and a tasting room. The application needs to satisfy sections 402.04M, 402.07A, 402.07D, as well as sections 110102 and 1202.02 of the Yamhill County zoning ordinance. Comprehensive plan policies are also applicable. OAR 660-033-0130 of the agricultural lands rules also apply. Please note that the request for the commercial solar power facility was appealed for a hearing before the Planning Commission, and the hearing was held on October 5th, 2017. The record was left open for a month. At their November 2nd hearing, the Planning Commission approved the request for a commercial solar facility in a 6-2 vote. I believe Kenneth Friday, the Planning Director, also has a statement he would like to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that one item that I noticed that had been brought up in testimony was about the Planning Commission's motion to initiate the process to amend the ordinance to prohibit solar farms on Class 1 through 4 soils. This motion was approved 6-2 by the Planning Commission, and our office has been working on this amendment. The difficulty to review an ordinance amendment like this one is the public notice. In 1998, voters passed Measure 56. It's a landowner notification requirement, and it requires cities and counties to send out notice to affected property owners whenever a more restrictive land use regulation is adopted. Since this would relate to all properties in the farm and farm forest zones, that equates to about 7,700 accounts. Some of those would be duplicate accounts, but we're estimating that it would be around 6,000 notices that need to be sent out. We have drafted up the language. We've sent the required public notice to the 35-day notice to the state, and we're working on the public notice and the way to get out those 6,000 public notices to affected property owners. Our goal is to hold a hearing in March, likely either March 1st or the 15th, but it depends on a number of factors, and we're still working on that. Having said all of that, this proposed restriction has no effect on this application. We're required to review this application on the land use regulations that were in effect when the application was made. So just want to note that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. At this time, we'll hear the applicant's case. So if you could state your name and your address for the record, please.
Thank you, Chair Surratt. Commissioners, my name is Damian Hall, here on behalf of the applicant, Yamhill Creek Solar. My address is 101 Southwest Main Street, Suite 1100, Portland, Oregon, 97204. I'm here with Troy Snyder, Principal of Yamhill Creek Solar.
Yes, thank you for allowing us to be here. Troy Snyder, address is 3519 Northeast 15th, Portland, Oregon, 97212. I'm the project developer of this proposed project. I have a presentation that we'd like to go through. Let me get it up.
So we were just connected to that a moment ago. I'm not sure what happened here.
Do you have the control? Oh, okay.
While they're doing that, can I ask that when you guys speak, that you try and speak more directly into the mics? It's really hard to hear you guys.
Sorry, yes, we'll do that, thank you.
Thank you.
And give the high sign if you can't hear us back there. Okay, thanks.
We do have seats in front.
Carrie, can you call?
We're having some technical problems, so we're going to try to get the pros in here. Be patient. Thank you. Not that you're not a pro, Laura.
Semi-pro.
Hey Diane, can you send Adam a roll over to 132? Okay, thanks. The laptop that they're trying to use to present has gone down. Yeah. Thank you.
Their help is on the way.
So, if I may, I'm not sure if this is actually here.
Is that on?
Okay. So, our presentation at its simplest consists of two parts. Troy is going to tell you a little bit about what it is that actually the project is comprised of, what the equipment is that we're going to put into the field, and what the logistics of that equipment is and the impacts.
They're indicating back.
Yeah. Is that microphone,
I don't know, is it?
the volume?
Or even
Even
hold it
closer
if it's
than-
easier for you to, so you don't have to.
So part one was Troy.
Can you hear? Is that better? Okay,
Okay.
all right.
So part one was Troy speaking, and I think his part is better served with the presentation. However, part two was me talking about the legal issues and the approval criteria, which it's essentially the text of your code on a slide. So I think we could invert the order in which we're going to go, because I can do my bit of the presentation without the specifics up on the screen. Although I will still need to look at that and scroll all the way down. So the approval criteria that apply are essentially twofold. The first is the state administrative rules that are specific to solar, photovoltaic solar utility facilities such as this on EFU land. And those are found at OAR 660, Division 33, Section 130, subsection 38. And these are relatively new rules. State law has allowed energy generation facilities on rural and EFU lands going back to the initiation of land use in the 70s. However, the specific administrative rules that apply to solar generation facilities were adopted in 2011. So those were adopted by DLC or LCDC after a rulemaking process held by DLCD, in which a stakeholder group was put together, and their charge was to identify what are the right balance of policy objectives for allowing solar on allowing development of large utility scale solar, but at the same time preserving farmland. And so that's that process involved not only the solar industry, but also the Farm Bureau, different state agencies, Thousand Friends of Oregon, farmland protection advocacy groups, as well as local government. And the outcome of that was a balance of those policy objectives. So the rules protect farmland, but also seek to provide a bit of certainty for where solar facilities can be placed. All right. As far as that bit of certainty, the one piece that we have is there are established acreage thresholds for facilities such as what we're proposing here. And it's a three-tiered acreage requirement. On high-value farmland, you can have up to 12 acres. On what is called arable lands, up to 20 acres. And on non-arable lands, which essentially is a catch-all for everything that's not high-value or arable, it's up to 320 acres. Here, we are in high-value farmland because that term is defined to include viticultural areas. So we are, I believe, approximately 20 degrees of elevation within a viticultural area. It is not high-value farmland because of the soil type of the project site. The soil type is alone would make this arable lands and not high value in the definition. However, state law does have other standards beyond the soil type, one of which viticultural area, which we are in. So we're hence the proposed maximum site of this project being 12 acres.
Can you hear in the back?
I think they're having a hard time. As you move away from the mic, they just have a real hard time.
I mean, this is really as close as I can talk to. I mean, is there a way to turn the volume up?
It's as high as it'll go.
And maybe
Okay.
just talk a little louder too, that might help.
Yeah, so 12-acre project because we're on high-value farmland, and that acreage threshold is really the only certainty that is provided under the rules. There's a number of standards in the rules. Again, this is the state rules that seek to balance that certainty for providing solar facilities with preservation of farmland. Again, the tiered acreage safe harbors cut both ways. The state said 12 acres is the smallest size that we would allow, and that is on high-value farmland. Therefore, we would have to go through an exception process to do anything larger on the site, and we're staying within the safe harbor. There are also requirements that the least suitable soils on the tract, which is essentially the property owned under the same ownership in the surrounding area, be the location where the project is proposed. And we've done that here today as well. There's also requirements that there be no unnecessary impacts to agricultural production on the portion of the site of the tract not occupied by the project. Here, and I think you can see it on this map over here, the project site is on the eastern portion of the property, and the western portion of the property is proposed to remain in grass seed and continue to be operated.
Madam Chair, could we just take 5 minutes? We're going to replace the batteries in the mic and see if that helps.
Okay, all right, we'll take a few minutes and just try to
See if we can get the
resolved.
slideshow going.
Okay, so we'll just recess for a few minutes. Or did you want to continue?
Oh, yeah, we'll take off from here. I will summarize the point that I was making here in a minute and then turn it back over to Troy. Thank you, Chair Sterrett.
Okay. Could we please have our full attention up here while Mr. Hall is speaking? Thank you.
So finally, as far as preserving the agricultural land associated with these sites, we're talking about
Excuse me. We'd like to give everybody the respect of paying attention to them when their turn to speak, as we're already having difficulties hearing Mr. Hall, so let's not make it more difficult. Everyone will have their turn to speak. Mr. Hall, sorry about that.
No problem. So we're talking about how the balance of the site would continue to be farmed. There's also requirements that site-specific plans be provided to prevent soil erosion and compaction during the construction and life of this facility, as well as ensure that there's no proliferation of weeds associated with the facility. Such plans have been were provided to the Planning Commission, and we have given the board even more detail-oriented, updated plans. And then, of course, we're going to talk more in depth later about requirements about not impacting surrounding agricultural uses. And then there is a line of argument that you may have seen in much of the opponent testimony that worries about proliferation of these kinds of projects. There are also some protections in state law that address that issue as well. There's limitations on how close a project can be and co-location of such projects. Basically, it requires that such projects be more than 1,320 feet apart. The tracks that they're located on, there's no project within such a vicinity. And then there's also a requirement that if you take a look at a 1 mile radius from any solar project, if there's more than 48 acres that's been approved or developed for a solar project, then you have to do a cumulative impacts analysis and take into account not just the one project, but all of the projects within that radius and what the impact is to the agricultural economy of all those projects. However, that issue is not implicated here. There are no other projects within a 1 mile radius. Therefore, we are only talking today about the impacts of this one proposed project. I kept it somewhat high level. We'll get more into the details of the specifics of this project, but I'll turn it over to Troy to talk about what it is we're proposing.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Damien. Again, thank you for letting us be here this morning. Again, my name is Troy Snyder, the applicant representing Yamhill Creek Solar. I would like to take a few minutes just go through our development process to give you a better understanding of why this site, why we are wanting to build a project here, why it works, talk about the specifics of the project, what we're proposing, touch on our community outreach, economic impact, and then we'll go back to the applicable criteria, and Damien can continue on that. So just to start off discussing the development process, and again, why this site. It starts with site selection. So essentially, within our business model, we need to be within investor-owned utility territory, so in PGE territory here. From that point, because of the grid and the infrastructure and how the power moves, we need to be relatively close to an existing substation. In this case, the substation is just south of the town of Yamhill. Next, we need to be, the site needs to be serviced, or lines need to be close to, three-phase power lines need to service the site or be close to the site. If the site is not serviced by three-phase power lines, we will have to build three-phase power lines, and that gets expensive. In this case, there's three-phase power lines that go right along Highway 47. Next, we do a preliminary screen, make sure there's no environmental issues, make sure we're not in a floodplain, make sure there's no mapped wetlands or any other environmental issues that would cause us problems at a later road. In this case, that that there are no known issues across the highway is in the floodplain, but not our site. And then once we find a site that meets our criteria, we also have to have a willing landowner, and it has to work for them. I will readily admit our project is not a fit for every landowner, but it is a fit for some. And in this case, it is. And I believe the landowner and his wife are going to testify later, and they can expand on that. So once we have a site selected, an agreement with the landowner, we begin working with the utility to get through some of our due diligence. We submit an application to the utility that kicks off a study process where they look at our project, they look at their infrastructure, and they say, okay, great, but here's the upgrades that we need to make to our infrastructure in order to accommodate your project. In this case, that is all gone very well. We also work with utility to negotiate and execute a contract to sell our power to them. In this case, again, we have done that, and everything is lined up. Once we're through that, we begin working through zoning and land use planning, and that brings us to where we're at today. So work with planning departments, address all the existing land use laws, zoning ordinances. But as that, we also reach out to the community and engage if they're willing to engage. So we often get the question of why solar here in Oregon. And even why solar here in Yamhill County. So solar here in Oregon, we are developing what's referred to as qualified facilities under PURPA. PURPA is federal legislation passed in 1978, where the federal government said we want the country to be more energy independent, and we also want to spur on the development of renewables. We understand that if somebody generates power, they can't necessarily go sell power to whoever they want in regulated environments such as here in Oregon. So PURPA requires the utility to buy power from a renewable generator who generates power. But there are some caveats to that. The rate at which the utility pays for the power is their so-called avoided cost rate. So the cost that it costs, in this case PGE, to buy or generate their next kilowatt hour of electricity, that is the rate that we are selling our power to PGE at. And that is studied and approved by the Utility Commission and updated every year. It is set that way so us selling power to the utility, there is no additional burden on ratepayers. I believe federal law says that ratepayers must be indifferent to whether the utility procures electricity from a qualified facility or if they generate their own. For the customer, it has no impact on rates, and the utilities, or the electricity stays within that utility and is, hopefully we're okay here, and is sold to the existing customers. Maybe? Yeah, we'll just keep going. And
Sorry about that.
yeah. So wanted to talk some about project specifics. So the project size, as Damien mentioned, 12 acres, and that's governed by the land use laws and what we can permit with a conditional use permit. That translates into a 2.2 megawatt AC project in this case. It will produce enough electricity to service 500-600 homes. And again, the rate at which we are selling power is based on market rates, so customers remain indifferent. And then just the project, once it's built, it's self-contained. There's no increased traffic. It's effectively an unmanned facility. We do not use water or other resources, and it is relatively quiet. And then breaking down the project further into its components, it's effectively made of three different components. There's the racking that goes into the ground, the panels that sit on top of the racking. Those are all then wired together into inverters that convert the electricity from AC to DC from DC electricity to AC electricity, and then there's a transformer that then steps up the power into the existing lines that already service the property. So we would not be building any new lines. We would just be using the infrastructure that is already there. The racking is, we don't use concrete to put it in the ground. It is just hydraulically pounded into the ground to a depth of 6 to 8 feet, depending upon the exact soil conditions, wind loading conditions, etc. The panels, they don't contain any toxic materials. They're safe, etc. The inverter is the one piece of equipment that
Adam may be remoting in
Yep.
to fix it.
The inverter is the one piece of equipment that may make some noise. Initially, we've spec'd in a central inverter. It has a fan on it that kicks on in the afternoons on hot days simply to cool it. It makes about the same amount of noise as a air conditioner unit, but we've intentionally placed that within the middle of our project, so by the time you reach the fence, it can't be distinguished above ambient noise. Plus, there is a high probability that we will end up using string inverters, which are effectively, instead of one large central inverters, we would use 50 small inverters that no longer have that fan, and that noise, any noise goes away. Next slide, I have just the racking, the profile, what it looks like, the height. Typically, these projects are, once they're built, they're about 7 feet in height, give or take. There is the potential that we might use trackers that track the sun throughout the day from east to west. And that, if we do that, the peak of the height would still be approximately the same height, 7 feet. And our slideshow is back, so there's the profiles that I was just talking about. I just want to go back one slide, just show a picture of what these projects typically look like after they are constructed. We do reseed the site after construction with native grass seed, work with the farmers, make sure the grass seed that is used does not cause any problems for any adjacent farming. Reseeding the project after construction is important for several reasons. One, it's an important part of our weed mitigation plan, which we've submitted an updated plan, and then also it's an important part of preventing any erosion issues that could happen. The site's relatively flat, so that's not as big of an issue, but still, we reseed regardless for many reasons. Again, the projects are pretty benign once they're built. And then just the impacts of the project. So again, the panels don't contain any toxic materials. They're safe. They're built to all electrical building codes. There's no increased traffic after construction. Yes, there will be some increased traffic during construction. We will work with the road departments, and in this case, ODOT, to coordinate. Sound, again, they're quiet, especially if we end up using the string inverters. And then glare, I'm not going to say there will be no glare. It's just a matter of perspective. There won't be any glare at ground level, just basic trigonometry. Any glare is directed back at the sky. You would have to experience glare, you would have to be at a significantly elevated position at very specific times of day, and even then, so a pilot flying by could conceivably experience a short bit of glare. The glare amounts to the same amount that would come off of a pond, a body of water, etc. To date, the FAA has no problem with solar projects. In fact, much larger projects than this are built at airports across the country. I believe Denver has the Denver airport has a project that's twice this size. The Indianapolis airport has a project that's about 4 times the size. And I believe here in Oregon, the city of Pendleton will be a project on airport property is going to be built this next summer. And then just wanted to touch base on the site itself, the site plan. It's configured this way, as you might have seen when you were visiting the site. The site is somewhat bifurcated by a little bit of a gully, some drainage. So for us not to go down in there, and then also it makes it easier for the continued farm practices on the property if we just stay to the east of that sort of swale there. That's why the site is laid out like it is. Again, you can see the adjacent land uses, most all agricultural uses, hazelnuts, grass seed, hay, etc. I believe the closest house is nearly 1,000 feet from the site. Yes, so that depicts it. So I believe from the corner to corner, and this is in the record, more detailed site plan, but 945 feet, give or take, to the nearest house, and the vineyard to the north is over 500 feet, and I believe over 30 feet in elevation. So a significant distance from the project itself. And then just want to touch on just community outreach. For us, it's important to reach out to everybody. So on nearly every project I work on, very intentional. About the same time I submit an application for a conditional use permit. While it's not required, I send letters to all the neighbors, just introducing myself, introducing the project, and providing my contact information if they have any questions or would like to discuss. In this case, after that letter, I did not hear from any neighbors. I did, after the project was, a neighbor requested a public hearing with the Planning Commission. I reached out to that neighbor. They had a few basic questions. We exchanged some emails, offered to sit down and discuss questions and any other concerns. We were not able to sit down. But I'm always willing to sit down, meet with neighbors, address concerns, answer questions, provide more feedback. Because for me, I thoroughly understand not everybody wants us there, but we're developing this project, and we want to be a good neighbor. We want to be transparent and open and listen to our neighbors. We make attempts to do so, but at the end of the day, it's a long-term endeavor, and we want to be a good neighbor. And then just the local benefits. It will create jobs during construction. Yeah, long-term jobs aren't plentiful because it's effectively an unmanned facility, but it will create construction jobs, and there will be some service and maintenance that occurs, but it will be less than one FTE long-term. Local investment, it's a fairly significant local investment. This project construction cost would be in the tune of $3 million. And then it's a new tax revenue source for the county. If the county were to enter into payment in lieu of taxes that's allowed under state law, it would be approximately $15,000 in new tax revenue per year for 20 years. And then this is when I turn it back over to Damien.
Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. And by all means, commissioners, if you have any questions or want to discuss any of the points that have been made or that I'm going to be making here, jump in and interrupt me, and we're glad to have that conversation. The main reason that we're here is to make sure that all your questions are answered. So circling back to state law, so now that you know kind of what the project is, let's talk about some of the specifics. We've talked about the acreage. We're under 12 acres. We're completely happy with the condition of approval that says keep the project under 12 acres. We've talked about the suitability of the soil. It's not high-value soil. It's high-value farmland by definition because we're in an AVA, but we're not using high-value soils, and we're keeping this on the side of the project with the lowest value soils. Unnecessary impacts to the other portions of the site, there are none. As discussed by Mr. Snyder, there are very limited impacts of these projects, and those impacts are limited to the area within the fence line surrounding the project. If you talk about noise, if you talk about vibrations, if you talk about reflected light, all of that is not able to be experienced from adjacent properties. So when you talk about, and there's a number of impact-related criteria that we're going to be going into, but that is what the evidence in the record demonstrates, that these facilities are benign and passive facilities. There are no outward-looking impacts that can be perceived from outside of the facility area itself. So hence the continued operation of the grass seed farming operation immediately adjacent. And you'll hear support, and there's been support at the Planning Commission level from the grass seed operator and property owner